have got 7 o'clock according to AT&T, so I want to do a few announcements before we begin class. I'm glad everyone can be here tonight and those who are online. So now I am. How about now? In the back, Mike Hughes, can you hear me? Guess not. Mike Hughes. Terry, can you hear me back? Can you hear me okay back there? A little more volume, Tim. How about that? Is that better? Ooh, okay. Few announcements before we begin. Donuts for dads and dudes. Dudes. I like that. Here at Summers, we sure appreciate our dads and male mentors. We'd like to say thank you to each of you this Father's Day with donuts and coffee, which will be available before class in the Activity Center this Sunday, July 16th. And if you're willing to help with summertime snacks, well, there's still some needs. If you're interested, please check the Sign Up Genius posted on our Summers Family Exchange on Facebook or contact Allison Penrod. And this Friday is our first Summers Kids' first Fun Friday of the summer. Is this Friday the 14th at 10:30 to noon in the Activity Center. This week our theme will be on fathers, including our Heavenly Father. We'll have story time, make Father's Day cards, free play with blocks, and enjoy a snack. Please remember that an adult must attend with their children. Please RSVP on the Summers Family Exchange on Facebook. Some updates on health. Tim Jorgensen's going to have surgery next Tuesday, the 18th, to do his second knee. So we need to remember him and his family. And then, of course, remember the Summers website. And so this week, we are going to begin our study on prayers of the Bible. And as always, I'll be watching the YouTube channel. There's several people tuned in listening, and so if they send questions through, I'll relay those to you, get a few every once in a while. And then, and if you ask a question, I'm going to repeat it so that they can hear it, those who are listening online, and there's several that are listening online right now. So, if you've got a handout, there's some on each of the front pews at the back, and I think Ernest was passing some out for me also. You passed them all out. All right, very good. If there's some on the front pews, if you didn't get one and you need one. On the handout, you see that Burton Kaufman listed several ways that people were shown praying in the Bible. And for the purposes of this class, I'm going to use a pretty broad definition of prayer, meaning someone who's having a conversation with God. I'm not going to just zero in on someone who went to their closet, got down on their knees and prayed. I'm going to anyone who has a conversation. For example, the conversation that Abraham had with God before he sent his 2 angels into Sodom and Gomorrah as an example. I wouldn't necessarily call that a prayer, but it's a conversation between a righteous person and his Father. So we go through these lessons, that will become more apparent to you. What I want to look at is the circumstances that person was in when they were praying, whatever it was. Were they mad? Were they angry? Were they sad? Were they upset? Had they lost someone? What was their situation? Jonah, he's one of my favorites because he was mad. He was acting like me. He was mad and acting naughty. And so we're going to cover that in his particular circumstances. On your handout, you see on the introduction, according to Mr. Locklear, all the prayers of the Bible, he says there are 650 definite prayers, and he used a broad definition of prayer in his book also. Alrighty, so Jonah is going to learn the hard way, is what I've titled this. First and foremost, there is a number of so-called Bible scholars who dispute that Jonah even existed. Jesus mentioned Jonah very specifically, which should remove any doubt that anybody has about whether or not Jonah existed and whether this story actually occurred or not. Now, people pervert things to their own desires. Over here, David, sorry. But the fact that Jesus mentioned the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish should remove any doubt. Jonah was a prophet. He gave a prophecy that's listed on your handout there, 2 Kings 14, and talked about how Israel was going to reclaim some of their land. So he should have been, and probably was, a popular prophet because he's given news that we, the Israelites, are going to be victorious over their dreaded enemies. But anyway, this prayer and these conversations that Jonah has with God, to me, emphasizes the mercy of God. I mean, mercy towards Nineveh, of course, but Jonah got a lot of mercy in here, and he needed it, as we all do. And I have certainly needed God's mercy and will continue to. Any of us who are arrogant enough to think that we don't need God's mercy, we need to do some praying and some studying. Also, in Burton Kaufman's commentary, he noted that this book is read every year by the Jews on the Day of Atonement. I don't know if that's still going on or not, but anyway. All right, so chapter 1. Jonah's given a task. Jonah don't want to do it. And he's very upfront, I guess. Well, maybe not upfront right off, but in the first 3 verses, he's told in verse 2, "Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for the wickedness has come up before me." But, one of those big little words, but Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down, got on a boat, and wanted to go to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Number one, you can't hide. You can't hide. And the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea. There was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. The sailors became afraid. Every man cried to his God. They threw the cargo on what was in the ship to lighten it, but Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship, lain down, fallen asleep. So the captain approached him and said, "How is it that you're sleeping? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us so that we will not perish." Another, I think, important thing to gather in this, Nineveh in the kingdom of Assyria is not Israelite. They are Gentiles. God cared about the Gentiles. He didn't just say, "These are my people, I don't care about anybody else." That's not true. God cared about the Gentiles. It was their sin that separated them from God. And I've given you some examples. Daniel spent lots of time with Nebuchadnezzar and the kings in Babylonia, and he taught them and preached to them. Some of them listened, some of them don't, as Belteshazzar didn't. Elijah went to the widow of Zarephath in 1 Kings 17. Elisha healed Naaman in 2 Kings 5. Later on, Naaman goes back to Nineveh and tells them, "Hey, it didn't take, and now your time's up." But God was concerned about Nineveh. In fact, 2 prophets in the Old Testament preached to Nineveh. And then Obadiah went to Edom. So they're out there, and God sends the storm, because you can run, but you can't hide, right, as they say. Do you think that God knew Jonah was going to do a runner, as sometimes the police say? Do you think he knew before he even asked him, this guy's going to run? What you think? You know, you can speculate when the Bible doesn't tell us. It's okay to speculate a little bit. Do you think God knew? Got lots of yeses. Sure, I think he did.
I think he was using just like he uses anybody for his purpose, and he showed us you can't hide.
Yes. As Rebecca said to those who are listening online, he was using Jonah. Do you think, and I'm not just picking on you, Rebecca, anybody, do you think that Jonah was also a subject of the teaching that needed to be done here? That it wasn't just the Assyrians that had to be taught, that God was wanting to teach Jonah something also? Absolutely. I believe that he knew Jonah was going to do what Jonah did, and that he was prepared, and he was using this to teach Jonah. He had something in mind for him. So yes, while we're not told that God knew he was going to do a runner, I believe that God knew that. Otherwise, he wouldn't be God, would he? Knowing human nature. Charles, did you want to?
I was going to ask the question, did the word of God come to Jonah? Do you think God spoke to him, or did somebody else?
I think God spoke to him. The word of the Lord came to Jonah in verse 1. I think it was a direct communication. I need you to go do this. And someone else, George?
Well, it's like anything dealing with people. You tell your kids to do something, you know good and well sometimes when you tell them something, they're going to do exactly what they're going to do opposite what you just told them. It's no different in human nature. They're not going to do something, they're going to go the opposite direction.
Now, George, my kids always did exactly what I instructed them to do, and then came back told me what extra things that they did too. Yes. We've all experienced that kid in our family that is not going to do it. You just know. That's why mamas and daddies have to be mamas and daddies, to correct that activity. There are those kids, though, that just do it because they do it.
Well, and as you're talking about the lesson that Jonah, he expects him, looking after at the end of this, he's going to tell everyone else what happened.
Who? Jonah. Mm-hmm. He wrote the book, evidently, or someone recorded it for us.
Because, an experience like that, especially guys, we have to tell stories to ourselves.
We're talking about a fish story, right? Yeah.
I'm sure he had to tell them, God told him.
Yes. Exactly. All right, so continuing on with chapter 1 at verse 7. All right, so the men, they're superstitious, they do believe in gods, and they cast lots. And they say, we got to figure out what's going on. So the best way they thought to do that was to cast lots. And so they did, and the lot, surprisingly, fell on Jonah. So they asked him, okay, and if you've been around sailors, they're not the nicest, personable people in the world necessarily. I'm sure they're pretty direct, and they probably jerked him up by his lapels and said, what is going on? What did you do, or what happened? I don't think they were very, called him down and said, let's have a cup of tea and figure this out. No, it was jerking him up and saying, what did you do? You did something, obviously. So then when he explained to them, and they, in verse 10, how could you do this? And for good reason. That's a great question. How could you do this? For the men, he told them in verse 11 that in verse 10, he was fleeing from the Lord. And they said, what do we need to do to you that the sea may become calm for us? So it was getting worse and worse. And they said, he said, throw me over. They didn't want to. They tried and tried and tried not to, but they had to anyway, so they threw him over and immediately said, God, don't hold us accountable for this, and then they made some offerings and vows. Now, this is a question out of left field. When Jesus mentioned Jonah, he said he was in the belly 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah was in the belly 3 days and 3 nights. So what day of the week was Jesus crucified on? You don't have to answer. We have traditionally said Friday. But that's not 3 days and 3 nights. So there's something for personal study on your own. Just think about that. All right. So that's the privilege of being a teacher. You can throw something at Ernest. All right. Yes. Correct. I think he expected that. But at this point, I don't know if Jonah was thinking, well, what they're going to do to me is worse than what's going to happen to me if I'm in the water. I don't know. Like I said, sailors aren't the nice, genteel people that would take all of this kindly, because if they're worried that they're going to die, they're not going to be nice to the guy that they blame. I don't know what was going through Jonah's mind, but we do have what was going through his mind in this next chapter. And so, yes.
Back in verse 9, I've always found it interesting that when they ask him, why is this happening and where are you from? He says in Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. But his actions didn't show that. And all of us at some time don't show the actions that we believe God to be who he is.
Well, before he got on the ship, but I think on the ship he was pretty much a believer at that point. Yeah, I think he was, yes, but I agree with you. His actions didn't back up what he's saying. But anyway, there's a couple of points in this 10 verses in chapter 2. Jonah's in a mess, and I'm thinking he's probably pretty convinced that he's going to die. I would be if it was, you threw me in the ocean, it's storming, and I'm swallowed by this great beast. I would assume that my demise is coming along shortly, so he prays. And in verse 1 it says he prayed to the Lord his God from the stomach of the fish, and he said, I called out of my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I cried for help from the depth of Sheol. You heard my voice. Verse 3, you have cast me in the deep. So he goes on and talks about everything that has happened to him as he goes through. Waters covered me, the great deep engulfed me, weeds were wrapped around my head, I descended to the roots of the mountains, the earth with its bars, but you have brought me up from the pit. brought up my life from the pit. Of course, he's writing this after the fact. I don't think he jumped in with a pen and paper to write anything down. So it's obviously this is written after the fact. So he's recounting his thoughts and the fact that he cried out and God did listen. So being disobedient to a direct command, a direct instruction, that's pretty bad. God, the word of the Lord came to him. Jonah, I want you to do this. You go, I'm out of here. I'm going to run and get away. That's pretty severe, but Jonah acknowledges that he was heard because of his attitude. His attitude obviously is changing, at least temporarily, we're going to see. But his attitude is changing while he's in this great fish, and he feels like he was heard. So, in verse 10, the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah up into the dry land. So, he decides, I'm covered in fish puke now. I need to go and do what I was supposed to do in the first place, and he goes. So in verses 3 through 5 of chapter 3, he rose, he went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3 days walk. George, how many miles can a healthy man walk in a day? So 3 days walk. 25, 25. So 3 days, 60 miles across. It's a big city. Of course, I don't know if it was a circumference or across, but it's a big city. 3 days walk. So Jonah cried out 40 days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. The people of Nineveh believed God. They called a fast, put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least. The Bible also tells us that it even got up to the king, and he commanded everybody, even to the point that they wanted the animals in sackcloth. They were convinced that the word of the Lord was true, and they were going to die. So in verse 10, another message, an example of mercy. When God saw their deeds, that they had turned from their wicked way, then God relented concerning the calamity which he had declared he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. So, is the power in the word or the preacher? Because are you convinced that Jonah was totally into it, that he was into this message? He wanted Nineveh to repent, that he wanted them to do better. What do you think? Or do you think he just wanted out of the jam he was in? Yeah, and he already thought he was going to die.
I think whether he liked Nineveh or not yet, he was obviously more afraid of the Lord at this point, and he knew he better do what he was told.
Yes, like it or not, like it or lump it, whatever. Karen, did you?
But he eventually says, I told you
Yes.
they were not going to change.
In that they were. They were. That he would relent, show them mercy. Yeah. He really didn't want him to. We'll get there. So, was the power in Jonah, or was the power in the Word? The Word itself. So, one can be a reluctant teacher and be successful. God, yes, this is true. Do what? Yeah, right. So, as the saying goes, you don't get any stars in your crown if you do it because you're just mad and you had to. Because you're more scared of God than you are of whatever. So, yeah. Okay, Ernest. You're keeping me awake. One of the lessons also in here, I think, that we can get is there is a point when God says, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not talking anymore. I'm done. And there's a couple of places that I think that comes up later on when Nahum preaches to Nineveh. He says, God's done. He's done with you. God, we're going to talk about this later on, God was done with Sodom and Gomorrah. He was done. There was going to be no more chances. There is a point. Another example is in Genesis 15:16. God is talking to Abraham. He says, you're going to get the land where you are. You're going to get this back. I mean, your descendants are going to be here. And he just throws this phrase in here. He says, for in the fourth generation they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. And I really believe what God is saying there, they've not run out of the chances that I'm giving them yet. But there is going to be a point when I'm done. I'm done. And I think that's a place where you can pick that up. 2 Peter 3 and verse 9, the Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. God's goal is not destruction, it's salvation. But right in that same chapter, Peter tells them there's a day, and it's going to be over, and he's going to be done, and it's going to be over. So there's a point. God's mercy will go so far, and then he determines, I'm I'm done. I'm done. I think Romans 1 is another place that we can get this. But anyway, so
It's important to say that God doesn't give up and he doesn't say, okay, I'm tired of this. He knows their hearts and he knows they're beyond coming back. So he stops.
yes. In the Jameson Fawcett commentary on this verse 4, this writer, now he's a secular guy, but he says this to him teaches that they were approaching that time when they were, how much time did they have left? 40 days. He tells you got 40 days. And so he was coming to that point, and this was, okay, here's your shot. 40 days. This is what you got. 40 days to turn it around. And they did. So anyway, so moving along to chapter 4. Jonah's just like me. It's hard to get these lessons across sometimes. But, again, that word but, it greatly displeased Jonah, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord. So again, he is still communicating with God. He prayed to the Lord and said, please, Lord, was this not what I said while I was still in my own country? Therefore, in order to forestall this, I fled to Tarshish, for I knew that you were a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness, one who relents concerning calamity. Therefore, Lord, now, O Lord, take my life. Death is better to me than life. The Lord said, do you have good reason to be angry? Wow. So mad he would rather be dead. And so we get a glimpse of the conversation that Jonah and God had before he left. He said, I told you that I didn't want to do this, and this is why. This is why. I told you I didn't want to do this, and this is why. They've turned around and straightened up. Wow. Wow. So God asks a very pertinent question. Do you have good reason to be angry? Who do you think you are? This reminded me of the conversation that God had, or that Job started with God in about chapter 38, and God says, well, let me ask you a few questions. And so it goes downhill from there for Job, and God starts asking the question, where were you when I did this? Where were you when I did this? Where were you when I did this? And if you can do all this, then I will admit to you that you can save yourself. And Job goes, maybe I overstepped. But God says, no, I'm going to continue with some more questions. So Jonah's got to get his lesson. So Jonah went out from the city, and he's still hopeful that God is going to destroy them. He says he sat east of it, made a shelter for himself, sat under it so he could see what would happen to the city. He's still hopeful. Why do you think that Jonah is so anti-Nineveh? Why do you think he is so much against them that he would rather see them destroyed? They are.
We want to see the bad guy at the end of the movie get what's coming.
We do. Mm-hmm. And he won? Yes. The Assyrians were not nice people. If they conquered you, they liked to do things like skin you alive and hang you up and let you die and then let the birds peck on you. They were not nice. They were cruel beyond measure. And if anybody deserved God's wrath, Jonah, yes, he thought so. And in my weak moments, there's a few people across the world that are world leaders that I think, wouldn't we be better off without them? and you probably have your own little list of world leaders across that are just cruel and evil, but I'm not the judge. I'd like to be sometimes, wouldn't you? But I'm not. Jonah wants to be the judge. And in my weakness and our weakness, sometimes we want to be the judge. We'd just like to take that guy out. But we're not God. It's not our decision. So he's mad enough, he wants to die. So God appointed a plant, grew up over Jonah to be a shade over his head and to deliver him from his discomfort. And Jonah was happy. Just one little plant made him happy. So then God appointed a worm, and when dawn came the next day, I'm in verse 7, it attacked the plant and withered. When the sun came up, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head so that he became faint and begged with all his soul to die. I mean, good grief, how many times is it? You know, I'm sitting there going, okay, now how many times is God going to let him say, well, just kill me, when God might just oblige him? To me, that is the height of foolishness to tell God, well, just kill me. Just kill me. That's how bad he is. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know about that. You know, Jesus said, fear the one who can kill the body and cast the soul into hell. And Jonah is really back-talking the very person that can do that. And yet he's still angry. Death is better to me than life. So in verse 9, do you have good reason to be angry about the plant? And he says, I have good reason to be angry, even to death. Then the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant which you did not work, for which you did not work, and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and left hand, as well as many animals? We can speculate from this point forward whether or not Jonah got the message or not. But, I mean, this is a person that really pushes back against God and his teaching. And if we need to evaluate ourselves. There are probably times in our lives that we have pushed back against the teachings of what we should and should not do. But man, you're talking about pushing it, even to the point, just kill me. Just take me out. So Jonah's got, as we summarize here, Jonah has several conversations. So how would you describe Jonah's overall attitude? I mean, we've kind of dabbled on it. I mean, how does he feel about his fellow man? He didn't care. Well, he cared. He wanted them taken out. I mean, he got up to the east of the city and said, I want to watch this. I mean, he knew about Sodom and Gomorrah when, Abraham walked out afterward. He could see the smoke coming up from the city. He could see that. I guess he's wanting to see that too. So, in your heart of heart, mind of minds, do you think Jonah learned anything about God's love for the Gentiles? I mean, what do you think through all of this? It doesn't, does it? It really, after reading this and everything that went through, and God it really makes me wonder, did he learn anything? Did he change his attitude and his thoughts? Because God did care about the Gentiles. He did care about them. And it was his plan. What was the purpose of the Israelites? What was their purpose? What promise? To bring the Messiah. They were the lineage of the Christ. That was their purpose. And if you look in Deuteronomy, 2 times Moses told them, you're not that special. It was because God made a promise that you're here. You aren't special. And he told them that twice in the first 6 chapters. They weren't getting it. They thought they were over and above anybody else. In Jeremiah 18, verses 7 through 10, this is God speaking to Jeremiah. And I don't know if Jeremiah was struggling with some of the same stuff or not, but God said to him, at one moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to pull down, or to destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the calamity I have planned to bring on it. Or at another moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to build up or to plant it. If it does evil in my sight, but not obeying my voice, then I will think better of the good with which I had promised to bless it. God makes the decisions based on behavior. And the sin of the Canaanites and the Philistines, that's why they were destroyed, is because of their sinful behavior, not because they weren't Jewish or weren't Israelite. It was because of their sin. And that's what God was alluding to Abraham when he's speaking to him. So, some lessons. Everyone is worthy to receive mercy. Everyone. Everyone is worthy. I think another lesson to get out of this is God's message is more powerful than the person who delivers it. His message, His word. And for any of us that teach, preach, or whatever, I know that all of us at different times when we've taught classes, preached, whatever, there are times that I'm sure that each of us has felt maybe inadequate or not done as good as we should have or whatever. God's message, God's word overcomes human frailties, human weaknesses. He just wants us to do our best at whatever role we're in. Ernest, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, of course, in the New Testament, God said He will show you a way of escape. So are you going to be overcome by sin,
Mm-hmm.
But did He do that in the Old Testament too?
Well, He gave Jonah a couple of chances. I don't know if Jonah took them all. He had, Jonah's to me like a child. You have to tell them over and over again before they get the message sometimes. And Jonah was there, but we're like that sometimes. But I think it's important for us to remember that. Oh, Tim, sorry. No, that's all right.
You had asked earlier if God knew what Jonah was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jonah, in his whatever prophecies he had before this time, may have been unconvicted. Maybe he said, well, maybe God will do this, maybe He won't, and all that kind of stuff. But I think after what Jonah went through with God during his period of time, God had a much more convicted prophet than what he had before. So I think Jonah would have been much more useful to him as far as prophesying, because he said he believed that God would do what He said He would do.
Yes, okay. For those who are listening online, Tim commenting on did God know He was going to run? Probably yes. But if Jonah got the lesson, he was certainly a much more effective preacher at this point. I mean, what a story. Guys, let me tell you what happened to me. And repeat that story to his audience would be a powerful message. All right.
But who would He have taught? Who did He think deserved to be taught?
Well, that to me is the overlying question of did he get it? If he didn't get it, he wasn't going to do it anymore. He wouldn't do any preaching other than to those he thought were worthy. And God is trying to show him You don't get to choose who's worthy. I choose. I'm God. I get to choose. And so, you know, I get what Tim's saying, and I agree to a point. I just kind of left this thinking, I'm not sure Jonah got it. But, I mean, that's speculation on my point. I mean, the fact that this is where it left and he was still mad and he was still wanting to die, I got my doubts. But if he did get the message, he'd be a very effective and powerful preacher. Yes, Tim.
Yeah, I understand the book does not tell us he got the message,
Right.
but it could be it's left that way to have the reader ponder what Jonah had to ponder. Because if he didn't get the point, who wrote the book?
True.
I mean, God could have inspired somebody else to write the book.
Right.
Jonah probably wrote the book, and he probably wrote the book at least because God told him to,
Right.
but maybe also because it dawned on him, at least to some degree, that God was in the right and he was in the wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the side of that he got the message is why would you put the thing in there and why would Jesus even mention him? You know, so that to me kind of leans towards he got the message and he went out and he was an effective preacher for God after that. But again, we can all speculate, and it's fun to have the yeah, right. Yes. Ask for the prayers of the priest or whatever. George?
Well, I find it interesting when he's in the belly of whatever, he, he's in the dark. I don't think he had a flashlight.
No.
And the fact he's just in the dark, walling around. I find it interesting he talks about the mountains. And unless he had kind of body experience, how did he know there's mountains down there? And just, the things he described about being where he was at.
Well, I kind of took from that Jonah is understanding that no matter where you are, God is there. And yeah, it's dark. I've seen the little children's books where he had a campfire inside the fish, the light, and I'm going, no. No. There wasn't no campfire in the belly of that fish. I mean, there could have been, God could have made one if he'd have wanted to, but I don't think there was. I think he was pitch dark and he was scared out of his wits.
And apparently he had enough sense not to complain about the fish. Because he knew that was God saving him.
Yeah. One would hope. Anyway, I really appreciate all the questions, comments, and does anybody have anything else? Next week we are going to talk about, I'm sorry.
I think it's interesting to where, somebody say, how could he not get it? How could he not listen to God? And it's silly because, we probably do that every day. Like, we can look right now at Jonah, the story of Jonah, and whether him be before he left or him after he ended up being forced to do what he wanted to do. Like, we sit here and say, hey, how can you just not get it? And there's things that we do every day and that we've done our whole lives that I'm sure applies the same to some extent.
Absolutely. None of us should be pointing fingers at Jonah because we got plenty of things that we can correct in our own life. Absolutely. All right. I'm going to turn you loose. Don't run in the hallway.